He was my GOAT. That's what Pat Jennings said about one of the 7 players on this list. And when a man who played over 1,000 top-level games and faced the greatest attackers football has ever produced picks his favourites, you listen. This isn't some pundit throwing names around for clicks. This is testimony from a goalkeeper who stood in the firing line for 2 decades, who saw genius up close, who had to study these men not as highlights, but as problems he needed to solve. Jennings didn't pick players because they were famous. He picked them because they terrified him, inspired him, and changed how he understood the game. These 7 names represent different types of greatness. Each one reflects a specific part of football that Jennings, from his lonely spot between the posts, learned to respect above all else. Let's dive into the mind of a legend and discover who made the cut. Pat Jennings arrived at the top level in the early 1960s. Football back then was brutal. Pitches turned to mud by November. Balls absorbed water and felt like rocks. Goalkeepers could be barged into the net. There was no protection, no sympathy. You had to be brave just to survive. Jennings wasn't just brave. He became the best goalkeeper in the world. He won every major honour except the World Cup. He earned 119 caps for Northern Ireland. He played at the highest level until he was 41 years old. His hands were famous. His throws were legendary. His ability to read the game was unmatched. But what made Jennings truly special was his mind. He studied opponents. He understood what made great players great. When he names his 7 favourites, he's not guessing. He's telling you exactly what excellence looks like from the hardest position on the pitch. First on the list is George Best. The genius, the unimaginable talent, the player Jennings shared more than just a pitch with. They were both from Northern Ireland. They both made their international debuts on the same day in April 1964 against Wales. For over a decade, they were the twin pillars of their national team. One, the immovable object. The other, the irresistible force. Jennings saw Best in training. He saw him on heavy, waterlogged pitches where normal players struggled to stay upright, and what he saw was something that defied logic. Best could do things with a ball that other players couldn't even imagine. That's the word Jennings uses. Imagine. Most forwards operate within the laws of physics and probability. Best rewrote them. His balance was supernatural. Defenders would slide in for tackles on those muddy pitches. Normal players would stumble or fall. Best would ride the tackle and use the momentum to accelerate forward. Jennings watched this happen over and over. It terrified him because the expected break in play never came. The foul whistle didn't blow. The defender was left on the ground and Best was through. But it wasn't just his balance, it was his eyes. Best didn't need to look at the ball to control it. He could maintain eye contact with the goalkeeper or defender while the ball stuck to his feet. For Jennings, who built his career on reading body language and anticipating movement, this was torture. You couldn't read Best. His gaze would tell you one thing. His feet would do another. Most players telegraph their intentions. A slight drop of the shoulder, a glance in a certain direction, a shift in weight. These are the clues goalkeepers live by. Best gave you nothing. He was blank, unpredictable. Jennings describes it as playing against someone who had access to a secret catalogue of moves. Things that simply didn't exist for other players. Dribbles that shouldn't work, but did. Angles that shouldn't be possible, but were. In the sanctuary of the Northern Ireland dressing room, away from the chaos that surrounded Best's life, Jennings saw the real man. He saw a player whose sheer presence and competitive edge matched anyone. Best was the first rock star footballer, the flamboyant superstar who lived a chaotic life off the pitch. But Jennings never cared about that. He cared about what Best did with a football. And what Best did was create moments of genius that Jennings, even as a teammate, could barely comprehend. Jennings often said it was ridiculous that Best never played at a World Cup. He thought Best's talent deserved that platform more than anyone. Northern Ireland were a small nation. They struggled to qualify for major tournaments. Best carried the team on his back for years, but the support around him wasn't enough. The infrastructure wasn't there. The quality of teammates, though brave and committed, couldn't match what England or Scotland had. Jennings watched Best drag Northern Ireland through qualification campaigns with sheer individual brilliance. But football is a team game. One genius can't do it alone. When Jennings finally reached the World Cup himself in 1982 and 86, long after Best's prime, he knew his teammate should have been there beside him. It was a source of genuine sadness for Jennings. He believed the world had been robbed of seeing Best on the biggest stage. Best deserved to be judged alongside Pelé, Cruyff and Maradona in those tournaments. And he was right. Their club battles were legendary too. Spurs versus Manchester United in the 1960s and 70s was the premier fixture. One match stands out. The 1967 Charity Shield at Old Trafford. In a bizarre twist, Jennings scored a goal. He punted the ball from his own penalty area, and it bounced over United keeper Alex Stepney into the net. It's one of the most famous goalkeeper goals in history. But even in a match where Jennings scored, Best was still the main threat. The game finished 3-3. Best, alongside Charlton and Law, tormented the Spurs defence all afternoon. Jennings had to be at his sharpest just to keep them at bay. Best also did something that terrified every goalkeeper in the league. In a match between Northern Ireland and England, Best flicked the ball out of Gordon Banks's hands as Banks prepared to punt it. Best headed it into the net. The goal was disallowed, but the message was clear. Against Best, you were never safe. You couldn't switch off for a single second. Jennings took that lesson to heart. Against genius, vigilance must be absolute. Next is Bobby Moore, the intellectual defender, the man Jennings calls the best defender he ever faced. This choice reveals Jennings's deep appreciation for the thinking side of football. Moore was elegant. Moore was calm. Moore was always in the right position. Jennings has a famous quote about Moore. He never seemed to get his kit dirty because he was always in the right position. Think about what that means. In the 1960s, defending was brutal. It was about sliding tackles, shoulder charges, and physical aggression. Defenders left the pitch caked in mud, but not Moore. His kit stayed clean, not because he didn't work hard, but because he solved defensive problems before they required a physical solution. For Jennings, this was the ultimate luxury. A goalkeeper's job is hardest when defenders are scrambling, when they're diving into tackles that leave the ball loose, when they're out of position and the striker has a clear sight of goal. Moore never let it get to that point. He intercepted passes that other defenders would have to tackle for. He read the game 2 steps ahead. For Jennings, an interception was a clean turnover. The defence could reset immediately. A tackle was a dirty turnover. The ball might spill loose. Chaos could follow. Jennings faced Moore frequently in London derbies between Spurs and West Ham. These were intense, high-scoring affairs. The rivalry between the two clubs was fierce. Both had passionate supporters who demanded nothing less than total commitment. Even in matches where Spurs scored multiple goals, Moore's class shone through. He was the one constant in the West Ham defence, the player who never panicked, the player who always found a solution. Jennings admired how Moore started attacks from the back. Unlike many defenders of the era who just booted the ball clear, Moore would bring it out and distribute with precision. This turned defence into attack instantly. Jennings, who was also known for his distribution with huge throws and punts, respected Moore as a kindred spirit. Both men saw the defensive zone not as a bunker, but as a launch pad. Both believed that possession should be treasured, not given away cheaply. Jennings often points to Moore's tackle on Jairzinho at the 1970 World Cup as the perfect defensive moment. It wasn't just a physical feat. It was a calculation of risk and timing executed under the highest pressure. That tackle validated everything Jennings believed about football. Composure is the most valuable attribute a player can possess. Moore had it in abundance. When everyone else was panicking, Moore was calm. When everyone else was rushing, Moore was measured. That's what separated him from every other defender of his generation. Third is Dave Mackay. the Iron Heart, the most competitive man Jennings ever met. This selection is deeply personal. Mackay wasn't just a teammate at Spurs. He was the captain who shaped Jennings from a raw recruit into a world-class goalkeeper. When Jennings arrived from Watford in 1964, Mackay was already a legend. He'd been a key part of the 1961 double-winning side. That team was revered. They'd achieved something no club had done in the 20th century, winning the league and FA Cup in the same season. Mackay was the heartbeat of that success. Mackay took it upon himself to teach the young goalkeeper what it meant to play for Tottenham. He demanded 100%, always, no exceptions, no excuses. In training, Mackay was as fierce as in a cup final. There are stories of Mackay physically pinning teammates against walls in five-a-side games if they didn't give full effort. For a young goalkeeper, this was a baptism of fire. It taught Jennings that talent meant nothing without the will to impose it. Every single day, Mackay set the standard. You matched it or you didn't belong. But Mackay wasn't just an enforcer. Jennings calls him the steel in the Spurs team. In the 1960s, forwards were allowed to charge goalkeepers. It was legal to bustle and barge them into the net. Having Dave Mackay as your midfield shield meant opponents thought twice before trying it. Mackay provided intimidation that gave Jennings space to operate. And crucially, Mackay could do everything. He could pass, he could shoot, he could control the tempo. He was the complete midfielder before the term became common. Jennings notes that Mackay was number one on everyone's team list. He was the indispensable engine of the side. Mackay also showed incredible resilience. He broke his leg twice and came back both times to lead Spurs to further glory. Jennings watched this recovery firsthand. Seeing Mackay refuse to let injury end his career likely influenced Jennings's own incredible longevity. It inspired him to maintain his fitness into his 40s. There's a story that captures Mackay perfectly. When Northern Ireland played Scotland, Jennings and Mackay were on opposite sides. Even though they were club teammates, Mackay crunched Jennings in a tackle. When Jennings protested, "What are you doing? We're teammates," Mackay replied, "Aye, but not today, laddie. This is white line fever at its purest. The ability to switch into pure competition mode where no quarter is given, not even to friends." Jennings admired this ruthlessness. It's what separated good players from great ones. Mackay was great. Fourth is Pelé, the global standard. When the conversation turns to the world stage, Jennings places Pelé at the summit. He describes Pelé as the best opponent on the world stage. His sheer presence, his clinical nature. For a goalkeeper who spent most of his career in the English First Division, encounters with Pelé were rare and precious. They happened during international tours and exhibition matches. These were the moments when British players measured themselves against the world's best. These matches were special occasions. They broke the routine of league football. They offered glimpses of a different level. Jennings uses the word presence to describe a psychological effect. Great players shrink the pitch for their opponents. They make the goal seem larger and the goalkeeper smaller. Pelé possessed this aura more than anyone. When Pelé was on the pitch, the entire defensive unit behaved differently. There was a heightened state of alert. Conversation stopped. Focus sharpened. Everyone knew danger was near. For a goalkeeper, this increased tension is exhausting. Maintaining focus when Pelé is lurking requires immense mental energy. You can't relax for a second. Pelé was a complete threat. He had no weak foot. He was devastating in the air. Jennings prided himself on his own aerial ability. He was famous for catching crosses one-handed, but he recognised Pelé's leap as a supreme athletic feat. There was no safe way to defend against Pelé. He could score from anywhere with either foot or his head. A poetic detail connects Jennings's career to Brazil. His final professional match was against Brazil at the 1986 World Cup in Guadalajara. It was played on his 41st birthday. Pelé had long retired by then, but playing against Brazil was the spiritual successor to those earlier battles. The ghosts of Pelé haunted every Brazilian team that followed. Jennings's inclusion of Pelé is also an acknowledgement of what could have been. He often lamented that George Best never got to challenge Pelé on the World Cup stage. By listing Pelé, Jennings is saying that Best was equal to this standard. That's the highest praise he could give. Jennings emphasises Pelé's clinical nature. In the few times they faced each other, or Jennings observed him, Pelé didn't waste chances. He was efficient. This mirrored Jennings's own efficiency as a keeper. Both men believed in economy of movement, doing the simple thing perfectly rather than the spectacular thing unnecessarily. That shared philosophy is why Jennings respected Pelé so deeply. It wasn't about flash, it was about effectiveness. Fifth is Bobby Charlton, the complete artillery. Jennings calls Charlton one of the most complete players he ever encountered. This assessment comes from years of facing Charlton during the fierce Manchester United versus Tottenham rivalry of the 1960s. To Jennings, complete meant that Charlton influenced every phase of the game. He wasn't a goal hanger waiting for service. He was the engine room. He carried the ball forward, he distributed it to teammates, and he finished moves with devastating power. The specific technical attribute Jennings highlights is Charlton's ability to strike the ball with incredible power and accuracy from long range. In the 1960s, balls were made of leather. They absorbed water and became heavy and unpredictable. Striking such a ball from 30 yards with power required perfect technique. Charlton mastered this. For Jennings, Charlton changed the geometry of defence. Usually, a goalkeeper feels relatively safe when the ball is 35 yards out. That's too far for most players to threaten the goal. With Charlton, that zone was a danger area. This forced Jennings to adjust his starting position. He had to be constantly set, ready to react. He couldn't relax even when the ball was in midfield. Jennings described the sound and velocity of a Charlton shot as unique. It wasn't just the speed. It was the heaviness of the strike. The impact when the ball hit your hands was jarring. Stopping it was physically painful. It required strong wrists and perfect hand positioning. These were traits Jennings was famous for. But even with his legendary hands, saving a Charlton thunderbolt was one of the hardest tasks in football. You had to be brave. You had to commit fully. Any hesitation, and the ball would fly past you into the net. Jennings and Charlton shared a temperament. Both were quiet, dignified men who let their football speak. They were the statesmen of their respective clubs. Jennings respected Charlton not just for his fearsome shot, but for his fairness. Charlton never dived. He never cheated. In an era where the professional foul was becoming common, Charlton played the game the right way. This was a value Jennings held dear. He believed football should be played with honour. Charlton embodied that principle. The battles between Spurs and United were the fixtures everyone wanted to watch. Greaves, Mackay and Jennings against Best, Law and Charlton. These were the greatest players of their generation going head-to-head, and Charlton was the heavy artillery that Jennings had to constantly monitor. One lapse in concentration and Charlton would punish you from 30 yards. Sixth is John Charles, the gentle giant, the hero. Charles holds a unique place in Jennings's list because he represents something beyond pure ability. He represents an ideal. Charles was world-class as both a centre-forward and a centre-half. This versatility fascinated Jennings. How many players in history could claim to be elite at both ends? Very few, perhaps none to the level Charles achieved. As a striker, Charles was a physical anomaly. He was massive, yet quick and technically gifted. For a goalkeeper, he was the ultimate aerial threat. Jennings, whose trademark was coming for crosses and dominating his area, knew that Charles was one of the few players who could legally and physically out-jump a goalkeeper using hands. Charles's leap was that powerful. His timing was that perfect. Defenders feared him in the box, but Charles was also world-class as a defender. Jennings admired this duality. He believed that understanding both ends of the pitch made you a more complete footballer. Charles proved it. He could terrorise defences one week and shut down the best strikers the next. But what Jennings emphasises most is Charles's legendary sportsmanship. Charles was never cautioned or sent off in his entire career. Think about that. In an era of hard men, brutal tackles, and constant physical confrontation, Charles remained above it all. He was called the gentle giant for a reason. He dominated through pure skill and physical superiority without resorting to violence. For Jennings, who was himself a gentle giant with a kind demeanour, this validated his approach to the game. You didn't need to be nasty to be dominant. You could impose yourself through presence, not aggression. The league was full of hard men like Norman Hunter and Tommy Smith who used intimidation. Charles proved there was another way. Jennings played against Charles in the twilight of Charles's career when Charles was at Cardiff or Hereford. Even then, the impression was permanent. A man of immense power who played with the grace of a much smaller player. Finally, there's Jimmy Greaves, the clinical artisan, the greatest finisher Jennings ever saw. This is personal because they were teammates at Spurs for nearly a decade. Jennings faced Greaves in training every single day. He saw Greaves at his best and learned from him constantly. Jennings is unequivocal. Greaves was the most natural goalscorer who ever lived. The defining quote from Jennings about Greaves is this: "Jimmy didn't just blast the ball, he simply passed it into the net." This observation highlights a profound technical truth. Most strikers rely on power to beat the keeper's reaction time. They try to hit it so hard that even if the keeper guesses right, he can't stop it. Greaves relied on placement and deception instead. He would wait. In one-on-one situations, Greaves would hold the ball until the goalkeeper shifted his weight or committed to a dive. The moment the keeper moved, Greaves would slide the ball into the vacating space. This required nerves of steel. Most strikers panic in those moments. They rush. They snatch at the shot. Greaves never did. He was ice cold. Jennings was famous for standing up big in one-on-ones. He would force strikers to make the first move. He'd spread himself and wait. This technique worked against almost everyone. But Greaves was the ultimate adversary in these duels. He wouldn't be rushed. He'd wait for Jennings to blink first. And the moment Jennings committed, Greaves would exploit the gap. Jennings credits Greaves with making him a better goalkeeper. Facing the world's best finisher daily was the ultimate education. Greaves had an effortless style. He didn't run around aimlessly. He conserved energy for the box. This taught Jennings to read the game more deeply, to ignore the noise and focus on real danger. When Greaves came alive, Jennings had to be ready. There was no second chance. Jennings often jokes that Greaves cost him his bonus money in training games, but won him the real bonuses on Saturdays. This camaraderie underpinned Spurs' success in the late 60s, including their 1967 FA Cup win. But their relationship had painful moments too. In October 1964, Northern Ireland played England. Greaves scored a hat-trick past Jennings. Jennings remembers thinking, "That's my mate against me." It was a brutal introduction to the fact that Greaves showed no mercy, even to friends. That match cemented Jennings' realisation that Greaves was in a league of his own. The ease with which Greaves found the net that day was frightening. Each goal was perfectly placed. Each finish was clinical. Jennings had no chance. He was being beaten by a master at work. Jennings and Greaves were close friends off the pitch. They were part of the social core of the Spurs team. Jennings speaks of Greaves with immense warmth. He calls him an absolute gentleman. This personal connection adds emotion to the selection. Jennings wasn't just picking a great player, he was picking a man he loved and respected. a man who stood by him as he developed from a raw recruit into the best goalkeeper in the world. Their friendship lasted long after their playing days ended. They remained in touch. They shared memories. And Jennings never stopped being grateful for everything Greaves taught him about concentration, positioning, and the art of goalkeeping. When you analyse Pat Jennings' 7 choices, a clear pattern emerges. He doesn't value raw athleticism or speed above all else. He values intelligence, technique, and character. George Best represents improvisation, the ability to solve problems that shouldn't exist, to see moves that aren't there and execute them anyway. Bobby Moore represents anticipation, the ability to prevent problems before they arise, to read the game so well that physical intervention becomes unnecessary. Dave McKay represents willpower, the refusal to accept defeat, the competitive fire that burns so bright it lifts everyone around you. Pelé represents perfection, the flawlessness of the complete footballer who has no weaknesses and dominates through sheer brilliance. Bobby Charlton represents power, the capacity to threaten from anywhere on the pitch, to make goalkeepers afraid even when the ball is 40 yards from goal. John Charles represents versatility, the mastery of the entire pitch, the ability to dominate as both attacker and defender. Jimmy Greaves represents precision, the economy of effort for maximum result, the clinical nature that wastes nothing. Together, these 7 players form a composite of the perfect footballer, but more importantly, they reflect the qualities of Pat Jennings himself. Jennings was a goalkeeper of improvisation. He made saves with his feet when his hands couldn't reach. He was a goalkeeper of anticipation. He read crosses better than anyone and claimed them before danger developed. He was a goalkeeper of willpower. He played until he was 41, refusing to let age diminish his standards. He was a goalkeeper of perfection. He won PFA Player of the Year, the only goalkeeper to ever do so. He was a goalkeeper of power. His massive clearance kicks were legendary. He was a goalkeeper of versatility. He adapted seamlessly through decades of change in the game, and he was a goalkeeper of precision. His handling was immaculate. He rarely fumbled. He rarely spilled. By selecting these giants, Pat Jennings isn't just telling us who he admired. He's telling us what he believed football, at its very best, should be. These weren't highlight merchants. They weren't players who looked good on television but disappeared when it mattered. They were men who delivered in the biggest moments, who faced the greatest pressure and thrived. Who understood that football was about more than skill. It was about character. It was about rising when your teammates needed you. It was about respecting the game and playing it the right way. Jennings didn't just admire their abilities. He feared them. He learned from them. And he still carries the imprint of their brilliance decades later. These weren't just opponents or teammates. They were the men who defined an era, the men who set the standard, the men who made everyone else better just by being on the pitch. When Pat Jennings says George Best was his GOAT, he's not making a casual statement. He's telling you that Best possessed something beyond explanation, something that couldn't be coached or copied. Pure genius. When he praises Moore's intelligence, Mackay's heart, Pelé's presence, Charlton's power, Charles's grace, and Greaves's precision, he's building a blueprint, a map of what greatness looks like from every angle. These 7 players represent the peaks of human achievement in football, and Pat Jennings stood between the posts, gloves raised, ready to face whatever they threw at him. That's why his testimony matters. That's why this list is special, because it comes from a man who didn't watch from the stands. He lived it, he battled it, and he earned the right to tell us who the real Titans were. If you enjoyed hearing who Pat Jennings rated as the true GOATs, don't forget to like and subscribe. Which of these legends is your favourite? Let us know in the comments.